Okay, so by having clicked this YouTube video, I'm gonna assume that you want to learn more about Jimmy Hoffa, or in the case that your name is Michael Hoyt, you're here to grade my final assignment, to which I say please give me a good grade. I really want it. I don't know if I deserve it, but I really want it. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Let's start with Jimmy Hoffa. I really feel the necessity to say this man was a savage. He just did not care at all about anything. He just went through life at his own pace, which was breakneck at all times, all the time, which got him a lot of enemies and probably killed him. You know, he was born on February 14th, 1913, and he served as a president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. That's kind of what he's known for from 1957 to 1971. He was a hardworking man who by his mid-20s was already an important regional figure in the IBT and would become vice president in 1952 and, president 1957. He was known as a tough, knowledgeable bargainer. He successfully centralized administration and bargaining in the International Office of the Union. He played a key role in the creation of the first National Freight Hauling Agreement. His efforts helped make the Teamsters the largest labor union in the United States. And all of this positive also came with the negative, which was kind of that he was pretty corrupt, Even his predecessor, Dave Beck, was pretty corrupt, and to, dethrone him and become his successor, Hoffa had to establish some shady connections as well. Well, nowadays people view Hoffa as kind of like this symbol of corruption in unions and why unions don't work. It's easy to forget that unions were kind of always corrupt. It's not really Hoffa. Hoffa was just the most known. He was just the guy that was there when the union was biggest, and it started to get ridiculous, the level of influence it could give criminals and mobsters and mafiosos. But we shouldn't forget earlier instances of this corruption. For instance, in 1929, under President Tobin, the Teamsters Union approached gangster Roger Towhee, since he was a famous bootlegger of the Prohibition era, and they had to ask for his protection against Al Capone and his Chicago outfit, because Capone was basically trying to control every union in the area. And even evidence of widespread corruption even after this began emerging after Tobin retired. In Kansas City, corrupt Teamsters locals spent years seeking bribes, embezzling money, engaging in extensive extortion and labor rackets, as well as beatings, vandalisms, and even bombings in an attempt to control the construction and trucking industries. And the problem got to be so serious that U.S. House representatives held hearings on the issues. Now, moving on to the shadier side of Hoffa, you can really start pinpointing the evidence back when he was collaborating with Johnny Dio, an Italian mobster and known labor racketeer, when they kind of created paper locals, which are basically local unions that don't really have any members just to get the votes in. So he was doing this while trying to take over Beck's place as president of the union. So he would create these paper locals, and he would submit votes to him. But these unions were not real. They were just real on paper, but there were no actual workers. So this challenge that Hoffa sought out against Beck caused a major national scandal, which led to 2 congressional investigations and several indictments for fraud and other crimes against both Beck and Hoffa. And new strict federal legislations and regulations regarding labor unions, and even this really helped develop the career of Robert F. Kennedy, as Robert F. Kennedy was hired as the subcommittee's chief counsel and investigator. This is also when almost the first times when Hoffa and Robert F. Kennedy really started butting heads and going at each other. Now, this rivalry kind of between Hoffa and the Kennedys, especially like Robert F. Kennedy, would come to shape both of them. They became foils of each other. They were basically nemesis, yeah. So the dynamics of their rivalry was basically Robert F. Kennedy thought Hoffa was just a racketeer and a criminal, and he wanted to lock him away, and he also wanted to climb the ranks. And if you want to climb the ranks, you gotta prove yourself. And there was basically no bigger challenge at the time than Jimmy Hoffa. He was the biggest fish, one of the biggest fish to fish out there at the time. And Hoffa was never rich. He grew up middle class, lower middle class. He worked very hard, and he had a grayer view of the world because of this. Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy had more black or white, right or wrong view. So in this sense, Hoffa started viewing Robert kind of as a spoiled brat. Robert couldn't stop looking at Hoffa as just another criminal. And this battle of nemesis has basically simmered for a while until it just completely blew out of proportions. Robert was named Attorney General in 1961, and immediately after he just created the Get Hoffa Squad. Just a squad from the Department of Justice whose sole purpose was to get Hoffa and his associates, which they actually did. The squad's efforts culminated in the convictions against Hoffa in 1964. They were accused and convicted of jury tampering and defrauding the union's pension fund. But despite that setback, Hoffa still held on to the Teamsters presidency even while he was in jail. He entered federal prison in 1967, however, he still was presiding over the union. However, he would later relinquish his title as president of the union, as he was offered a deal by Richard Nixon, in which it stated that he could not engage in any union activities until the 1980s, and in turn he would be able to gain his freedom. He would leave the federal prison. But knowing Hoffa, the arrogant, cunning, power-hungry man that he did not respect this deal. So he attempted to gain his position as president of the union back. This was where you can say, okay, he messed up. During his final years, basically everyone was just gunning for Hoffa. During his stint from 1971 to 1975, he was almost the most wanted man in all of America. The FBI was trying to frame him or catch him doing something illegal. They just wanted him out of the equation. They didn't want him to be able to exert his agency anymore. The mafia now also didn't want him to reclaim his spot as the president of the Teamsters Union, since they didn't want to incur the wrath of the president by being related to him. They much rather preferred a substitute. And basically all of these factors became too much for Hoffa to handle. And in 1975 he was declared missing, and he was never found again. He was declared dead in 1982. No matter which way you spin it, Hoffa was definitely the protagonist of the late 50s to early 70s. He was just an absolute unit that did whatever he wanted, and I guess the world just shaped a certain way for him. Of course, his luck would eventually run out. In the 1975 he went missing, and there are a lot of theories regarding his disappearance. Predominant theory is that Frank Sheeran killed him, as a few weeks before he died in prison, he confessed that he indeed was the one that killed Hoffa. However, there are even theories that he fled to Argentina and didn't actually die there. But, they're all still theories, so believe what you'd like. There's no one that's truly 100% correct on this. Now, moving on to Hoffa's legacy. Whenever I think of his legacy, I usually think of two main legacies he left on the world. The first one being his legacy as the president of the IBT and his legacy as a person. So let's start with his legacy as the president of the IBT, which to me basically means he decreased the overall trust there was in unions at the moment. Unions were huge at the time. People trusted them. People put their hopes in them, put their money in them. They put their pensions there. They were relying on that money for their retirement, and they trusted Hoffa with it. And Hoffa mishandled that, and the mob racketeered of that, and he basically showed that unions can't really be fully trusted ever, which shows today, as unions are still pretty big, but they're probably not going to get to the height they once were. And then that leaves us with his second legacy, which is his legacy as a person, which I consider to be the nobler of his two legacies. And I believe this because it almost feels like a cautionary tale. Hoffa was a normal man. He was the average American. I believe he truly wanted to help the people, the workers that were part of his union for this reason. Because he was born like 99% of other Americans, he understood how they felt, and he actually wanted to better their lives. However, he was forced to make some choices that jeopardized this goal of his. By allying with the mob, the second he did that was the second he made Kennedy his enemy. The second he made Kennedy his enemy is the second he went to jail. And the second he went to jail was the second he signed the plea deal with Nixon. And the second he signed the plea deal with Nixon, his fate was sealed. He was never going to be able to rule over the Union again. And even though he tried, it backfired on him.